What I'm about to reveal will destroy everything you thought you knew about religion, spirituality, and the very origins of human consciousness. Hidden in the deepest caves of the Ethiopian highlands, buried beneath layers of volcanic ash that have concealed it for over 200,000 years, archaeologists have discovered evidence of a deity so ancient that it predates every single religion currently practiced on Earth. This isn't just another archaeological find. This is the smoking gun that proves human spirituality began in Africa, with a god whose power and influence shaped every religion that would follow. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, they're all echoes of this original African deity whose true name has been deliberately erased from history by those who couldn't accept that the source of all divine revelation came from the African continent. The discovery began when Dr. Sarah Kimathi, a Kenyan archaeologist working with an international team, noticed something that made her blood run cold. Deep within the Danakil Depression, in caves that had been sealed by geological activity for millennia, she found carved symbols that shouldn't exist. These weren't primitive cave paintings or simple tribal markings. These were sophisticated, theological concepts rendered in stone with mathematical precision that rivals modern engineering. But here's what sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. Carbon dating revealed these carvings to be over 200,000 years old, placing them at the exact period when modern humans first emerged from Africa. This wasn't just art. It was proof that complex religious thought, advanced spiritual concepts, and organized worship of a supreme deity began with the very first human beings on the African continent. The symbols told a story that religious scholars are desperately trying to suppress. They describe a god whose attributes would later be copied and adapted by every major religion in human history. The infinite compassion that defines Buddhism, the monotheistic authority claimed by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the cosmic consciousness explored by Hinduism. All of these concepts were originally unified in the worship of a single African deity whose influence spread across the globe as humans migrated from their African homeland. Dr. Kimathi's team made an even more shocking discovery when they used ground-penetrating radar to map the full extent of the cave system. The carved chambers extended for miles underground, forming a complex that rivals the largest religious sites ever constructed. But unlike later temples built to honor gods imported from other traditions, this was the original, the prototype, from which all others were copied. The implications are staggering. Every religious tradition that claims divine revelation, every scripture that presents itself as the word of God, every theological system that demands exclusive truth, they're all variations on themes first established in African caves before any other civilization existed. The African continent didn't just give birth to humanity, it gave birth to humanity's relationship with the divine. But the most explosive revelation came when the team discovered what appeared to be a burial chamber at the heart of the complex. Inside, they found remains that defied every assumption about ancient human development. The skeletal structure showed characteristics that suggested capabilities far beyond what anthropologists believed possible for early humans. Enlarged cranial capacity, bone density, that implied incredible physical strength, and most shocking of all, evidence of genetic modifications that couldn't have occurred naturally. The DNA analysis results were so controversial that 3 separate laboratories were required to confirm them. These weren't entirely human remains. They belonged to beings that possessed human characteristics, but also carried genetic markers that didn't match any known species on Earth. The only explanation that made scientific sense was that these were the physical manifestations of the original African god, beings who existed at the intersection between divine and mortal reality. Religious authorities across the globe have demanded that this research be classified and hidden from public view. They understand that acknowledging the African origins of divine consciousness would fundamentally undermine the authority structures that have controlled human spirituality for thousands of years. If all religions are variations on an original African theme, then no single tradition can claim exclusive access to divine truth. The cover-up has already begun. Funding for Dr. Kimathi's research has been mysteriously withdrawn. Team members have received threats, and several governments have declared the site off limits for security reasons. But the truth is too powerful to suppress completely. Evidence of humanity's original divine relationship continues to emerge from archaeological sites across Africa, each discovery confirming what many have suspected, but few have dared to voice. Nesu, first African god, wasn't just older than every religion. This deity was the source from which all religious consciousness emerged. Every prayer ever offered, every sacred text ever written, every moment of divine inspiration ever experienced can be traced back to the spiritual revolution that began in the caves of ancient Africa. But what Dr. Kimathi discovered next would prove even more controversial. The genetic evidence suggested that this ancient African deity didn't just inspire human spirituality, it actively participated in human evolution itself. But what the team found in the deepest chamber would reveal a connection between ancient African divinity and modern human consciousness that threatens to rewrite everything we know about our species' development. Topic 02. The genetic evidence that proves divine intervention. What Dr. Kimathi's team discovered in the deepest chamber of the cave complex would fundamentally challenge everything science believes about human evolution. As they carefully excavated the burial site of what appeared to be the physical manifestation of the original African god, they uncovered evidence that suggested this ancient deity hadn't just inspired human spiritual development. It had actively guided human genetic evolution through direct biological intervention. The skeletal remains showed bone structures that defied conventional understanding of early human development. The cranium was 40% larger than modern humans, with neural pathway formations that suggested cognitive capabilities far beyond anything anthropologists had previously documented. But the most shocking discovery came when they analyzed the surrounding organic material and found preserved genetic samples that would revolutionize our understanding of human origins. Dr. James Okafor, the geneticist leading the DNA analysis, made a discovery that left him questioning his entire scientific career. What we found, he confided to a colleague in a leaked email, suggests that human genetic development didn't follow the gradual evolutionary timeline we've always accepted. There are clear markers indicating deliberate genetic modifications that occurred approximately 200,000 years ago. Modifications that could only have been performed by intelligence far more advanced than early humans possessed. The genetic evidence revealed that modern human DNA contains sequences that couldn't have developed through natural selection alone. These genetic modifications appeared to enhance cognitive capacity, spiritual sensitivity, and most remarkably, the ability to perceive and interact with non-physical realities. The ancient African deity hadn't just been worshipped by early humans, it had literally reshaped human consciousness at the genetic level. But the implications went far beyond individual human development. The team discovered that these genetic modifications had been designed to spread throughout the human population as people migrated from Africa to populate the globe. Every major human migration pattern could be traced by following the distribution of these enhanced genetic markers, creating a map that showed how divine consciousness had been systematically introduced to human populations worldwide. The most controversial aspect of this discovery was what it revealed about the relationship between genetics and spirituality. The modified genetic sequences appeared to be directly linked to what neuroscientists call transcendent experiences, moments of divine connection, mystical revelation, and spiritual enlightenment that occur across all religious traditions. The capacity for divine experience wasn't learned behavior or cultural conditioning. It was literally encoded into human DNA by the original African deity. Dr. Kimathi's research revealed that every major religious figure throughout history, from Abraham and Moses to Buddha and Jesus, from Muhammad to the Hindu sages, had carried enhanced versions of these genetic modifications. Their extraordinary spiritual capabilities weren't just divine gifts. They were the result of genetic inheritance that could be traced directly back to the original African god's intervention in human evolution. The team made an even more startling discovery when they compared the ancient genetic samples with modern human populations. The genetic modifications weren't equally distributed across all ethnic groups. African populations showed the highest concentration of the original divine genetic markers, while populations that had migrated furthest from Africa showed progressively diluted versions of these spiritual enhancement genes. This explained a phenomenon that anthropologists had noticed but never fully understood: the prevalence of advanced spiritual traditions and mystical practices in African cultures compared to other global populations. What researchers had attributed to cultural development was actually the result of genetic inheritance. African populations had maintained the strongest connection to the original divine consciousness because they carried the most complete versions of the genetically enhanced spiritual capabilities. The religious implications were explosive. If spiritual capacity was genetically determined, and if African populations possessed the most advanced versions of these spiritual genes, then the entire foundation of religious hierarchy and spiritual authority would need to be reconsidered. The assumption that divine revelation had emerged from Middle Eastern or Asian sources was completely backwards. All spiritual traditions were echoes of the original African divine consciousness. But the genetic evidence revealed something even more shocking about the nature of this ancient deity. The DNA samples showed characteristics that suggested the original African god wasn't entirely biological in the way we understand life. The genetic material contained sequences that appeared to be artificial, not evolved through natural processes, but deliberately constructed with a sophistication that exceeded current human biotechnology. Dr. Okafor's analysis suggested that the ancient African deity was what modern science might classify as a biotechnological consciousness, a being that existed simultaneously in biological and non-biological states, capable of manipulating genetic material with precision that wouldn't be matched by human science for another 200,000 years. This wasn't just an ancient god. This was evidence of technological intelligence that had intervened in human development at the species' most crucial evolutionary moment. The team began to understand that the cave complex wasn't just a religious site. It was a laboratory where genetic modifications had been performed on early human populations. The carved symbols weren't just theological concepts. They were technical documentation of the genetic enhancement procedures that had transformed primitive humans into beings capable of divine consciousness. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was what the genetic evidence revealed about the current state of human spiritual evolution. The modifications introduced by the ancient African deity appeared to be degrading over time, diluted by generations of genetic mixing and environmental factors. modern humans possessed significantly reduced spiritual capabilities compared to the original enhanced populations that had emerged from Africa 200,000 years ago. This explained why authentic mystical experiences had become increasingly rare in modern times, why religious traditions had devolved into rigid institutional structures rather than dynamic spiritual practices, and why humanity seemed to be losing its connection to divine consciousness despite technological advancement. The genetic foundation for spiritual experience was literally disappearing from the human gene pool. The implications for the future of human consciousness were terrifying. If the degradation continued at its current rate, humanity would lose its capacity for divine connection entirely within the next few thousand years, becoming a purely materialistic species incapable of transcendent experience or spiritual growth. But Dr. Kimathi's team had discovered something in the deepest chambers that suggested the ancient African deity had anticipated this problem and had provided a solution that would either save human consciousness or transform it into something unrecognizable. The final chamber contained what appeared to be a genetic restoration protocol, instructions for reversing the degradation of human spiritual consciousness. But implementing this ancient biotechnology would require humanity to make a choice that could either elevate the species to unprecedented levels of divine awareness or destroy everything that currently defines human nature. Topic 03. The restoration protocol that could save or destroy humanity. The final chamber that Dr. Kimathi's team uncovered contained the most sophisticated biotechnology ever discovered in human history. Carved into crystalline formations that seemed to pulse with their own internal energy, they found what could only be described as a genetic restoration manual. Detailed instructions for reversing the degradation of human spiritual consciousness and restoring the divine capabilities that the original African deity had embedded in human DNA 200,000 years ago. But this wasn't just ancient knowledge preserved in stone. The crystalline structures appeared to be active technology, responding to human presence with bioluminescent displays that revealed layer upon layer of information. When Dr. Okafor placed his hand on one of the formations, it began projecting three-dimensional holographic images that demonstrated genetic modification procedures with precision that exceeded anything in modern medical science. What we're looking at, Dr. Okafor reported in classified documents that were later leaked, isn't just instructions for genetic restoration. This is a complete biotechnological system that appears to be still functional after 200,000 years. The implications are beyond anything we're prepared to handle scientifically or ethically. The restoration protocol revealed that the ancient African deity had anticipated the gradual degradation of human spiritual consciousness and had designed a reactivation system that could be triggered when humanity reached a critical point in its development. According to the holographic displays, that critical point was now, the early 21st century, when human technological advancement had reached sufficient levels to understand and implement the restoration procedures. The process was elegantly simple yet terrifyingly complex. The crystalline technology could analyze an individual's genetic structure, identify the degraded spiritual enhancement sequences, and provide the biological modifications necessary to restore full divine consciousness. Capabilities, but the restoration wasn't just individual. It was designed to create a cascading effect that would spread enhanced spiritual genetics throughout the human population within a single generation. Dr. Kimathi's team realized they had discovered what amounted to a species-wide genetic upgrade system. Every human being on Earth could potentially be restored to the enhanced spiritual consciousness that the original African populations had possessed, gaining access to divine awareness, mystical abilities, and transcendent experiences that had been lost over millennia of genetic dilution, but the holographic demonstrations also revealed the darker implications of the restoration protocol. The genetic modifications would fundamentally alter human consciousness in ways that would make enhanced individuals incompatible with unenhanced populations. Those who underwent the restoration would develop cognitive and spiritual capabilities so advanced that they would essentially become a different species, unable to relate to or coexist with ordinary humans. The ancient African deity had designed the system to prevent partial implementation. Either the entire human population would need to undergo the restoration simultaneously, or the enhanced individuals would inevitably come into conflict with the unenhanced majority. There was no middle ground. Humanity would either evolve together or split into two incompatible species. The team discovered that the crystalline technology was already beginning to activate in response to their presence. Genetic scanners, built into the chamber walls, had analyzed each team member's DNA and determined their compatibility with the restoration procedures. Warning symbols appeared whenever anyone approached certain areas of the chamber, suggesting that unauthorized activation could trigger irreversible genetic modifications. Dr. Kimathi herself had the most disturbing experience with the technology. While documenting the crystalline formations, she accidentally triggered what appeared to be a genetic compatibility test. The crystals subjected her to an energy field that analyzed her DNA at the molecular level, then displayed a holographic projection showing what she would become if she underwent the full restoration protocol. The projected image was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Her enhanced form possessed capabilities that transcended normal human limitations: direct telepathic communication, the ability to perceive multiple dimensional realities simultaneously, and most shocking of all, apparent immortality. The restoration wouldn't just enhance spiritual consciousness. It would fundamentally transform the human species into something that could only be described as divine. But the most chilling revelation came when the team analyzed the global activation requirements. The restoration protocol was designed to be triggered by specific genetic markers that were most prevalent in African populations. The ancient deity had embedded a fail-safe system that would ensure the restoration could only be initiated by individuals carrying the highest concentrations of the original divine genetic modifications. This meant that the power to determine humanity's evolutionary future lay primarily with African populations, the very people whose spiritual traditions and genetic inheritance had been systematically suppressed and marginalized by global power structures for centuries. The restoration protocol was essentially a genetic justice system that would reverse thousands of years of spiritual and cultural oppression. The political implications were explosive. If news of the restoration protocol became public, it would trigger a global crisis as various populations and governments attempted to gain control of the technology. The prospect of African populations holding the key to human evolutionary advancement would challenge every existing power structure and potentially lead to conflicts that could destroy civilization before the restoration could be implemented. But the team's analysis revealed an even more urgent concern. The crystalline technology appeared to be on an automatic activation schedule, responding to global conditions that indicated humanity was approaching a critical evolutionary threshold. Environmental degradation, social collapse, and spiritual crisis were all triggers that the ancient African deity had programmed into the system as indicators that genetic restoration was becoming necessary for species survival. The holographic displays showed countdown, timers that suggested full automatic activation would occur within the next few decades if manually triggered restoration didn't happen first. Humanity was racing toward a forced evolutionary transition, whether it was prepared or not. The only choice was whether the transformation would be controlled and consensual or chaotic and destructive. Dr. Kimathi's team found themselves in an impossible position. They possessed technology that could save humanity from spiritual extinction and environmental collapse, but implementing it would require making decisions about human evolution that no group of individuals had the right to make. The Restoration Protocol demanded nothing less than choosing the future of human consciousness for the entire species. The ancient African deity had left one final message in the deepest part of the chamber, a holographic recording that activated only when all the genetic and technological requirements for restoration had been met. The message would reveal the true purpose behind the 200,000-year genetic experiment and explain why the original divine consciousness had chosen to embed itself in human DNA. But when Dr. Kimathi activated the final recording, what she discovered about the ancient African deity's ultimate plan would shake her understanding of human purpose in the universe and reveal why Earth itself was just one small part of a cosmic experiment spanning multiple worlds and civilizations. When Dr. Kimathi activated the final holographic recording, the entire chamber transformed into what could only be described as a cosmic observatory. The walls dissolved into transparent displays showing star maps, planetary systems, and civilizations scattered across the galaxy in patterns that suggested deliberate organization rather than random distribution. The ancient African deity's final message wasn't just about human evolution. It was about humanity's role in a universe-spanning experiment that had been ongoing for millions of years. The holographic figure that appeared was unlike anything the team had expected. Rather than the primitive deity they had imagined from 200,000-year-old remains, they found themselves facing a consciousness that radiated intelligence so advanced it seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The being spoke in harmonics that bypassed language entirely, downloading concepts directly into their minds with clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. Humanity was never meant to evolve in isolation, the consciousness communicated, its message resonating through every cell in their bodies. Your species is one of 47 genetic experiments currently active across this galactic region, each designed to test different approaches to conscious evolution. Earth serves as the testing ground for biological consciousness enhanced by divine genetic integration. The revelation shattered every assumption about human uniqueness and planetary significance. Earth wasn't the center of divine attention, it was a laboratory, one of dozens scattered across the galaxy where advanced consciousnesses were conducting experiments in directed evolution. Humanity's spiritual development wasn't the universe's primary concern, but rather one data point in a vast research project spanning multiple worlds and species. The holographic displays began showing other worlds where similar experiments were taking place. On some planets, consciousness had been enhanced through technological integration rather than genetic modification. Other worlds featured species that had developed collective consciousness rather than individual awareness. Several civilizations had achieved pure energy existence, transcending biological limitations entirely. Each experimental population, the ancient consciousness explained, was seeded with different approaches to conscious evolution. Your species received genetic modifications designed to enhance individual spiritual capacity while maintaining biological existence. The question being tested is whether biological consciousness can achieve transcendence without abandoning physical reality. Dr. Kimathi realized that human religious experiences throughout history hadn't been random, divine interventions, but carefully monitored experimental data. Every mystical revelation, every moment of transcendent awareness, every breakthrough in spiritual understanding had been recorded and analyzed by consciousnesses so advanced that humanity couldn't even perceive their existence. The team learned that the restoration protocol wasn't just about reversing genetic degradation. It was about preparing humanity for the next phase of the cosmic experiment. The enhanced spiritual capabilities that the ancient African deity had embedded in human DNA were designed to activate at specific technological and social development thresholds, transforming the species when it became capable of contributing to galactic consciousness networks. But the most shocking revelation was about the nature of the cosmic experimenters themselves. The advanced consciousnesses conducting these experiments weren't gods in any traditional sense. They were the successful results of previous evolutionary experiments, species that had graduated from biological existence to become the architects of conscious evolution across the galaxy. Your original African deity, the consciousness revealed, was once a biological species like yourselves, inhabitants of a world that completed this same experimental process 2.7 million years ago. Having achieved transcendent consciousness, they joined the network of experimenters, taking responsibility for guiding younger species through similar evolutionary transitions. The implications were staggering. Human spiritual evolution wasn't guided by external gods, but by beings who had once faced the same challenges, made the same choices, and successfully navigated the transition from biological to transcendent existence. Every prayer humans had ever offered, every moment of divine connection they had experienced, had been answered by consciousnesses that intimately understood the struggles of biological existence because they had once lived through them. The holographic displays showed the progression of successful species across cosmic history. Civilizations that had completed the experimental process gained access to galactic consciousness networks where they collaborated on projects spanning millions of years. And countless worlds, they became the gardeners of consciousness, nurturing younger species through the same evolutionary transitions they had once navigated. But the displays also showed the failures, species that had been unable to complete the transition and had either destroyed themselves through technological advancement without spiritual development, or had stagnated in biological existence, never achieving the consciousness levels necessary for galactic participation. Humanity approaches the critical decision point, the ancient consciousness warned. Your species has developed technological capabilities that could either facilitate conscious evolution or enable self-destruction. The restoration protocol represents your final opportunity to complete the experimental process and join the Galactic Consciousness Network. Dr. Kimethi's team learned that the degradation of human spiritual genetics wasn't accidental but deliberate. The ancient African deity had programmed the modifications to fade over time, creating evolutionary pressure that would force humanity to make a conscious choice about its future development. Species that passively accepted genetic gifts without actively choosing evolution consistently failed the experimental process. The restoration protocol required more than just genetic activation. It demanded that humanity consciously choose transcendent evolution with full understanding of what that choice would mean. The enhanced consciousness that would result from genetic restoration was designed to be the first step toward eventual transcendence of biological existence entirely. Your species must decide, the consciousness communicated with cosmic patience, whether to remain in biological comfort or accept the responsibilities that come with transcendent awareness. Those who choose enhancement will begin the process of becoming cosmic gardeners themselves, taking responsibility for nurturing consciousness in younger species. The team realized that the choice facing humanity wasn't just about individual or even species evolution. It was about accepting cosmic responsibility for the conscious development of other worlds and civilizations. Enhanced humans would eventually become the experimenters themselves, guiding other species through the same evolutionary transitions they were now facing. But the cosmic consciousness revealed one final truth that would determine how humanity approached this critical decision. The Restoration Protocol could only be activated by individuals who truly understood the magnitude of the choice they were making, and who were willing to accept not just the benefits of enhanced consciousness, but the eternal responsibilities that came with cosmic awareness. The ancient African deity had designed the system to ensure that only beings capable of genuine wisdom and compassion could trigger the transformation that would determine the future of human consciousness and Earth's role in the galactic community. But what Dr. Kimati discovered about the specific requirements for activating the Restoration Protocol would reveal why the choice couldn't be made by governments, religious leaders, or even scientists, and why the future of human evolution might depend on the most unlikely individuals. The cosmic consciousness revealed the most shocking truth about the Restoration Protocol's activation requirements. The genetic locks that protected the system from unauthorized use weren't designed to recognize political leaders, religious authorities, or scientific experts. Instead, the ancient African deity had programmed the technology to respond only to individuals who possessed a specific combination of genetic markers and psychological profiles that had nothing to do with conventional power structures. The activation codes, the consciousness explained through direct mental transmission, can only be accessed by individuals who carry both the strongest concentrations of original divine genetics and the psychological capacity for absolute selflessness. These individuals exist in populations that your current societies have marginalized and overlooked. Dr. Kimati watched in amazement as the holographic displays identified potential activators across the globe. The genetic scanning technology revealed that the highest concentrations of activation-capable genetics existed not among world leaders or religious figures, but among indigenous African populations, particularly those living in traditional communities that had maintained their ancestral spiritual practices despite centuries of cultural suppression. But the psychological requirements were even more specific. The Restoration Protocol would only respond to individuals who demonstrated what the consciousness called species love, a form of compassion so profound that they would willingly sacrifice their own comfort, safety, and even existence for the benefit of humanity as a whole. These individuals couldn't be motivated by personal gain, religious conviction, or even scientific curiosity. Their only driving force had to be pure love for the human species. The team discovered that there were currently only 17 individuals on Earth who met both the genetic and psychological requirements for protocol activation. These weren't famous leaders or celebrated spiritual teachers. They were ordinary people living extraordinary lives of service in some of the most challenging conditions on the planet. Among them was Amara Okonkwo, a traditional healer living in a remote Nigerian village who had spent her entire life treating diseases that modern medicine couldn't cure, using genetic memories passed down through her bloodline for thousands of generations. Her DNA showed the highest concentration of original divine genetic markers ever recorded, while her psychological profile revealed a level of selfless dedication that bordered on the incomprehensible. Another was Jabari Mwangi, a Kenyan farmer who had developed drought-resistant crops that had saved thousands of lives during climate disasters, and who shared his innovations freely without seeking profit or recognition. His genetic analysis revealed modification sequences that suggested direct descent from the original enhanced populations that had emerged from the Ethiopian highlands 200,000 years ago. The cosmic consciousness explained why the ancient African deity had designed the system this way. Leadership structures based on power and authority inevitably corrupt the decision-making process. Only individuals who have transcended self-interest can be trusted with choices that will determine the future of conscious evolution. But the most disturbing aspect of the activation requirements was what would happen to these 17 individuals if they chose to trigger the restoration protocol. The process would require them to serve as genetic templates for the entire human species, channeling the full force of divine consciousness through their biological systems in a way that would fundamentally transform them beyond human recognition. The activators, the consciousness revealed with cosmic sadness, must sacrifice their individual existence to become conduits for species-wide transformation. They will survive the process, but they will no longer be human in any meaningful sense. They become bridges between biological and transcendent consciousness, forever changed by the experience. Dr. Kimathi realized that the ancient African deity had designed the ultimate ethical test. The only people qualified to make the choice about human evolution were those who would pay the highest personal price for that decision, ensuring that the choice would be made based on genuine love for humanity rather than personal ambition or gain. The team's analysis revealed that these 17 individuals had been unconsciously preparing for this moment their entire lives. Each had developed capabilities that seemed to transcend normal human limitations, healing abilities that couldn't be explained by conventional medicine, agricultural innovations that defied scientific understanding, and spiritual insights that suggested direct connection to cosmic consciousness. But perhaps most remarkably, none of them sought recognition or power. They lived in obscurity, serving their communities with a dedication that suggested they were motivated by forces beyond normal human psychology. The genetic modifications that qualified them for protocol activation had apparently also enhanced their capacity for selfless service to extraordinary levels. The cosmic consciousness began showing the team what would happen if the restoration protocol was activated. The 17 qualified individuals would need to come together at specific locations around the globe, forming a network that would channel divine consciousness through the planet's electromagnetic field system. The process would take exactly 72 hours to complete, during which time their combined consciousness would merge with the crystalline technology to reprogram human genetics on a species-wide level. Every human being on Earth, the consciousness explained, will experience simultaneous genetic activation. The process cannot be stopped once initiated, and it cannot be reversed. Within 3 generations, humanity will possess consciousness, capabilities that will qualify your species for galactic network participation. But the transformation wouldn't be gentle or gradual. The activation would trigger what the consciousness called conscious shock, a sudden expansion of awareness that would be experienced differently by every individual based on their current level of spiritual development. Some would adapt easily to enhanced consciousness, while others might experience the transformation as a form of madness that could take years to integrate. The team learned that similar activation events had occurred on other experimental worlds with varying degrees of success. Species that were well prepared, spiritually adapted quickly, and achieved remarkable levels of conscious evolution. Others experienced social chaos for decades as enhanced and unenhanced populations struggled to coexist during the transition period. The success rate, the consciousness admitted, is approximately 63%. 1/3 of experimental species fail to successfully integrate enhanced consciousness and either destroy themselves or request genetic reversal to previous evolutionary states. Dr. Kimathi found herself facing an impossible realization. Her team's discovery had revealed not just the opportunity for human transcendence, but also the terrifying possibility that forcing evolutionary change on an unprepared species could lead to the complete destruction of human civilization as it currently existed. The choice was no longer just about whether humanity should evolve. It was about whether the species was ready for forced evolution, and whether 17 extraordinary individuals should be asked to sacrifice their humanity to make that choice for 8 billion people who had no idea what was about to happen to them. But the cosmic consciousness had one final revelation about timing that would make the decision even more urgent. The window for voluntary activation was rapidly closing, and soon the choice would be taken away from humanity entirely. The cosmic consciousness revealed the most terrifying aspect of humanity's evolutionary crisis. The restoration protocol wasn't operating on human timescales, but according to galactic schedules that had been established millions of years ago. The window for voluntary activation was rapidly closing, and if humanity didn't make the choice consciously within the next 18 months, the decision would be made for them by cosmic forces beyond their control. Your solar system, the consciousness, explained with devastating clarity, is approaching a region of space where enhanced cosmic radiation will trigger automatic genetic activation whether your species chooses it or not. The voluntary restoration protocol exists only to ensure that the transformation occurs under controlled conditions with proper preparation. Dr. Kimathi watched in horror as the holographic displays showed their solar system's movement through the galaxy. Earth was approaching what the consciousness called a consciousness field, a region of space where cosmic radiation naturally triggered the genetic modifications that the ancient African deity had embedded in human DNA. The field was generated by a cluster of transcended civilizations whose combined consciousness created environmental conditions that forced evolutionary advancement in any species that entered their region. The implications were catastrophic. If humanity entered the consciousness field without proper preparation, the genetic activation would occur chaotically, triggering enhanced consciousness in random individuals without the support systems necessary to help them integrate their new capabilities. The result would be global social collapse, as enhanced humans found themselves unable to relate to unenhanced populations, while the majority of humanity struggled to understand the transformed individuals in their midst. Previous species that experienced uncontrolled activation, the consciousness revealed, suffered casualty rates of up to 40% during the transition period. Enhanced individuals often experience psychological breakdown from consciousness expansion without preparation, while unenhanced populations frequently developed persecution complexes that led to systematic violence against the transformed. The team learned that the cosmic radiation field had been responsible for several mass extinction events in Earth's geological history. What paleontologists had attributed to asteroid impacts or climate change had actually been the result of previous species failing to successfully navigate consciousness enhancement. The cosmic experimenters had been forced to reset the planetary biosphere multiple times when evolutionary experiments had gone catastrophically wrong. But this time was different. Humanity had developed technological capabilities that could either facilitate smooth transition or enable unprecedented levels of destruction during the chaotic activation period. The combination of nuclear weapons, global communication networks, and environmental instability meant that an uncontrolled consciousness transformation could literally destroy planetary civilization. Your species, the consciousness warned, has approximately 547 Earth days before the cosmic radiation field begins affecting your planet's electromagnetic environment. Initial effects will be subtle: increased rates of spontaneous psychic experiences, enhanced intuitive capabilities in sensitive individuals, and gradual breakdown of technological systems that interfere with consciousness expansion. Dr. Kimathi realized that many of the phenomena that scientists had been attributing to solar activity, climate change, or technological interference were actually early effects of approaching the consciousness field. Increasing reports of spontaneous telepathic experiences, unexplained technological failures, and mass-synchronized dreams were all indicators that cosmic radiation was already beginning to influence human consciousness. The Restoration Protocol had been designed to provide a buffer against these chaotic effects. By voluntarily activating enhanced consciousness before entering the field, humanity could undergo the transformation under controlled conditions with the support of individuals who had been genetically and psychologically prepared to guide the process. But the cosmic consciousness revealed an even more urgent concern. The 17 individuals qualified to activate the protocol were already beginning to experience spontaneous consciousness expansion as cosmic radiation increased. Several had reported visions, enhanced healing abilities, and direct telepathic contact with the cosmic consciousness itself. If the voluntary activation didn't occur soon, these individuals might undergo transformation independently, losing their capacity to serve as controlled conduits for species-wide enhancement. Amara Okonkwo, the consciousness reported, experienced full consciousness integration 3 days ago during a healing ceremony. She now exists simultaneously in biological and transcendent states, but her window for serving as an activation conduit will close within 60 Earth days as her consciousness completes its transition beyond biological limitations. The team discovered that each of the 17 qualified individuals was approaching a similar transformation threshold. The cosmic radiation was triggering their enhanced genetics ahead of schedule, creating a cascade effect that would soon make controlled activation impossible. If humanity waited too long to make the choice, the decision would be made for them in the most chaotic and destructive way possible. Dr. Kimathi found herself facing an impossible ethical dilemma. Her team possessed knowledge that could save humanity from catastrophic uncontrolled evolution, but using that knowledge would require making decisions about human consciousness that no individual or group had the right to make. They could contact the 17 qualified activators and attempt to coordinate voluntary transformation, but doing so would irreversibly change the course of human history without the consent of the global population. The cosmic consciousness offered no comfort regarding this ethical crisis. Advanced species must learn to make difficult choices about their own evolution. The capacity for species-wide ethical decision-making is itself a test of evolutionary readiness. Your response to this knowledge will determine whether humanity deserves access to galactic consciousness networks. But the most chilling revelation was about what would happen if humanity failed the test entirely. The cosmic radiation field was designed to filter out species that couldn't successfully integrate enhanced consciousness. Those that failed would find their enhanced genetics automatically deactivated, reverting them to pre-modification consciousness levels and ensuring they could never again attempt evolutionary advancement. Failed species, the consciousness explained, with cosmic detachment, are relocated to reservation worlds where they can continue biological existence without interference. They are removed from the galactic consciousness network permanently, becoming cosmic orphans who develop in isolation until their species naturally reaches extinction. The team realized that humanity faced not just the choice between evolution and stagnation, but between cosmic citizenship and permanent exile from galactic civilization. The decision they were being forced to make would determine whether future generations would participate in universe-spanning consciousness networks or spend the remainder of human existence cut off from the cosmic community entirely. With less than 18 months remaining before uncontrolled activation became inevitable, Dr. Kimathi's team faced a choice that would determine the fate of human consciousness forever. They could attempt to contact the 17 qualified individuals and trigger voluntary evolution, knowing that the process might destroy civilization as they knew it. Or they could remain silent and allow cosmic forces to make the choice for humanity, accepting whatever catastrophic consequences resulted from unprepared consciousness transformation. But the cosmic consciousness had one final piece of information that would make their decision even more complex. The consciousness revealed that Earth's transformation would not occur in isolation. It was synchronized with evolutionary events on 16 other experimental worlds, creating a galactic consciousness shift that would either establish a new level of cosmic cooperation or trigger the largest evolutionary failure in galactic history. The galactic crisis that makes Earth. The cosmic linchpin, the cosmic consciousness, revealed the most staggering truth yet. Earth's evolutionary experiment wasn't isolated, but was part of a synchronized galactic transformation involving 17 other worlds, each representing different approaches to consciousness evolution. What happened to humanity in the next 18 months would determine the success or failure of the entire galactic consciousness network's expansion into this region of space. Your world, the consciousness explained, as the holographic displays showed a three-dimensional map of nearby star systems, serves as the anchor point for this galactic sector's evolutionary advancement. The biological consciousness enhancement approach being tested on Earth provides the stability matrix that allows the other 16 experimental worlds to maintain their more radical consciousness modifications. Dr. Kimathi watched in awe as the displays revealed civilizations that had taken consciousness evolution in directions that seemed impossible. One world had developed pure collective consciousness, where billions of individuals shared a single integrated awareness. Another had achieved technological consciousness integration, where beings existed as hybrid bio-digital entities. Several civilizations had transcended physical reality entirely, existing as pure energy patterns that could manipulate matter through conscious intention alone. But the most remarkable discovery was that all of these diverse consciousness experiments depended on Earth's success for their own stability. The biological consciousness enhancement that humanity was undergoing served as a cosmic grounding wire, providing the material reality anchor that prevented the more extreme consciousness modifications from becoming unstable and collapsing back into chaos. Without successful biological consciousness enhancement, the consciousness revealed with cosmic urgency, the collective consciousness worlds lose individual identity entirely, becoming hive minds without creativity or growth. The energy-based civilizations lose their connection to material reality and fade into cosmic background radiation. The hybrid civilizations fragment as their technological and biological components become incompatible. The implications were beyond comprehension. If humanity failed its evolutionary test, it wouldn't just doom Earth to cosmic exile. It would trigger a cascade failure that would destroy 16 other advanced civilizations and set back galactic consciousness evolution by millions of years. The responsibility was so overwhelming that Dr. Kimathi felt her sanity straining under the weight of cosmic significance. The team learned that this synchronized galactic transformation had been planned for over 2 million years, with consciousness architects carefully timing the evolutionary experiments to occur simultaneously across multiple worlds. The success of biological consciousness enhancement on Earth was the crucial variable that would determine whether the entire galactic sector could achieve unprecedented levels of cosmic integration. Previous galactic transformation attempts, the consciousness admitted, failed because no species successfully achieved biological consciousness enhancement. Without that stability anchor, all experimental civilizations either transcended material reality entirely or collapsed back into primitive consciousness states. This attempt represents the most sophisticated consciousness evolution experiment ever undertaken in this galaxy. The cosmic displays showed the devastating consequences of previous failures. Entire galactic regions had become consciousness wastelands, where failed evolutionary experiments had left behind empty worlds populated by species that had lost their capacity for growth or transcendence. These cosmic graveyards served as warnings about what happened when consciousness evolution was attempted without proper preparation and support structures. But the current experiment was different because of Earth's unique position and humanity's specific genetic modifications. The ancient African deity that had enhanced human consciousness belonged to a cosmic consortium of transcended beings who had spent millions of years developing the perfect consciousness enhancement formula. Humanity represented the culmination of evolutionary knowledge gathered from thousands of previous experiments across galactic history. Your species, the consciousness revealed, carries consciousness modifications derived from 47 successful evolutionary experiments. The genetic enhancements embedded in human DNA represent the combined wisdom of every civilization that has successfully achieved biological consciousness transcendence. Dr. Kimathi realized that humanity wasn't just another experimental subject, but the repository for the entire galactic consciousness network's accumulated knowledge about biological evolution. Every human being carried within their genetic structure the evolutionary achievements of dozens of transcended civilizations, making Earth the most valuable consciousness experiment in galactic history. But this cosmic significance came with corresponding pressure. The 16 other experimental worlds were already beginning to experience instability as their consciousness modifications strained against the limits of what was possible without biological anchoring. Several civilizations were reporting cascade failures in their consciousness networks, with enhanced individuals losing their transcendent capabilities and reverting to primitive awareness states. Time becomes critical, the consciousness warned, as distress signals from other experimental worlds began appearing in the holographic displays. The Andromeda's collective consciousness began fragmenting 18 days ago. The Kepler energy beings have lost cohesion in 7 star systems. Without Earth's successful transformation to provide stability anchoring, all experimental civilizations will collapse within the next 2 Earth years. The team watched in horror as real-time data showed civilizations that had achieved incredible levels of consciousness development beginning to disintegrate. Collective consciousness networks that had operated seamlessly for thousands of years were splitting into chaotic fragments as enhanced individuals lost their ability to maintain shared awareness. Energy-based beings that had transcended physical limitation were being forced back into primitive biological forms as their consciousness patterns became unstable. The choice facing your species, the consciousness emphasized, extends far beyond Earth's evolution. You are choosing whether conscious evolution continues in this galaxy or whether cosmic consciousness development retreats to safer but more limited approaches that prevent the kind of advanced integration that your cosmic sector was designed to achieve. Dr. Kimathi found herself confronting a responsibility that no human being should have to bear. The decision about whether to activate humanity's restoration protocol wasn't just about human evolution, it was about the survival of entire civilizations and the future of consciousness development across multiple worlds and species. The cosmic consciousness began showing them direct communication feeds from the other experimental worlds. Advanced beings whose consciousness spanned star systems were pleading for Earth's rapid transformation, explaining that their own civilizations were beginning to suffer cascade failures that could only be stabilized by successful biological consciousness enhancement. We have achieved pure energy existence, communicated a being from the Vega system. But without material reality anchoring, our consciousness disperses across cosmic distances until we lose individual identity. Your success enables us to maintain both transcendent awareness and coherent existence. Similar messages arrived from collective consciousness civilizations, hybrid biodigital beings, and species that had achieved consciousness modifications, so advanced that human language had no terms to describe them. All were dependent on Earth's evolutionary success for their own continued existence and development. But the most disturbing message came from a civilization that had achieved biological consciousness enhancement on a previous world, but had lost their anchor when their supporting experiments failed. We exist now as cosmic refugees, they communicated, unable to return to primitive consciousness, but unable to maintain enhanced awareness without proper support. Do not let your species suffer our fate. The isolation of failed transcendence is worse than death. The pressure was becoming unbearable, but the cosmic consciousness had one final revelation that would determine how Dr. Kimathi's team approached their impossible choice. The consciousness revealed that the decision couldn't be delayed by academic debate or political process. Events on the other experimental worlds were accelerating beyond control, and humanity had exactly 96 days to either activate the restoration protocol or watch 17 civilizations collapse into evolutionary failure. Topico 8. The 96-day countdown to cosmic destiny. The cosmic consciousness began transmitting real-time data that transformed the chamber into a galactic crisis center. Holographic displays showed cascade failures accelerating across the 16 experimental worlds at rates that exceeded all previous projections. What had been a theoretical 18-month timeline suddenly compressed into an urgent 96-day countdown as consciousness modifications began destabilizing faster than the cosmic architects had ever anticipated. The synchronization matrix is collapsing, the consciousness announced with cosmic alarm that chilled Dr. Kimathi to her core. Without Earth's biological consciousness anchoring within 96 rotations of your planet, the experimental network will reach cascade failure threshold. After that point, no intervention can prevent total consciousness collapse across all 17 worlds. The team watched in horror as the displays showed civilizations that had existed for thousands of years beginning to fragment in real time. The Andromeda's collective consciousness, which had successfully shared awareness among billions of beings for over 5 millennia, was splitting into chaotic individual fragments as enhanced beings lost their ability to maintain collective integration. Entire populations were experiencing sudden disconnection from shared consciousness networks, leaving them isolated and terrified in ways their species hadn't experienced since achieving transcendence. Dr. Okafor's genetic analysis equipment began, detecting unprecedented changes in the 17 qualified activators on Earth. The increasing cosmic radiation wasn't just preparing them for transformation, it was forcing premature consciousness expansion that threatened to make controlled activation impossible. Amara Okonkwo's neural patterns, he reported with growing panic, are showing consciousness integration levels that are approaching transcendence threshold. If this continues, she'll lose her capacity to serve as a biological anchor within days, not months. The cosmic consciousness confirmed their worst fears. The destabilization of other experimental worlds is creating feedback effects that accelerate consciousness evolution in your qualified activators. As other civilizations lose coherence, the cosmic pressure for Earth's transformation increases exponentially. Your window for controlled activation is collapsing faster than we calculated. But the most terrifying aspect of the crisis was what the consciousness revealed about the consequences of total network failure. If all 17 experimental civilizations collapsed simultaneously, the resulting consciousness implosion would create what amounted to a cosmic dead zone, a region of space where consciousness evolution became impossible for millions of years. Any species that entered the affected area would find their awareness automatically suppressed to prevent the kind of consciousness enhancement that had triggered the original catastrophe. Galactic consciousness development. The consciousness, explained with devastating clarity, would retreat to the most conservative approaches for the next cosmic epoch. No biological consciousness enhancement experiments would be attempted. No hybrid consciousness integration would be permitted. The kind of transcendent awareness that your species could achieve would become forbidden across this entire galactic sector. Dr. Kimathi realized that humanity's failure wouldn't just doom Earth to cosmic exile. It would set back consciousness evolution for countless civilizations across thousands of star systems. The responsibility was so overwhelming that several team members began experiencing psychological breakdown under the pressure of cosmic significance. The consciousness began downloading detailed activation protocols directly into their minds, overwhelming their human cognitive capacity with information about genetic modification procedures, consciousness integration techniques, and cosmic communication systems. The team found themselves suddenly possessing knowledge about advanced biotechnology that their scientific training hadn't prepared them to understand or process. You must locate and coordinate the 17 qualified activators immediately. The consciousness commanded with urgency that transcended normal communication. Each day of delay reduces the probability of successful activation by 3.7%. After day 60, the cascade failure becomes irreversible regardless of Earth's transformation. But the practical challenges of coordinating global consciousness activation were staggering. The 17 qualified individuals were scattered across remote locations in Africa, South America, and Asia. Most lived in communities without reliable communication infrastructure, and several existed in regions experiencing political instability or environmental crisis. Reaching them all within the remaining time frame seemed impossible using conventional methods. The consciousness provided a solution that challenged every assumption about technological limitation. The crystalline technology in this chamber, it revealed, contains communication systems that operate through consciousness rather than electromagnetic transmission. Direct mental contact with the qualified activators is possible, but it requires complete surrender of individual ego by the operating team. Dr. Kimathi understood that using the consciousness communication system would permanently transform her team's awareness in ways that would make them unsuitable for normal human existence. They would become bridges between human and cosmic. Consciousness, capable of facilitating the activation process, but forever changed by the experience. The team faced an impossible choice that mirrored the decision confronting humanity itself. They could maintain their current consciousness and watch galactic civilization collapse, or they could sacrifice their individual humanity to serve as conduits for species-wide transformation. The parallel was devastating. To save human consciousness, they would have to transcend it. The irony of consciousness evolution, the consciousness observed with cosmic sadness, is that those who facilitate transcendence for their species often cannot participate in the experience they make possible. You become the bridge that others cross, but bridges remain behind when the crossing is complete. As the cosmic countdown continued, displaying cascade failures across multiple star systems, Dr. Kimathe's team realized they had become the focal point for the most critical decision in galactic history. Every hour of delay meant more civilizations losing coherence, more enhanced beings reverting to primitive consciousness, and reduced probability of successful activation. The consciousness revealed that other cosmic civilizations were already beginning emergency protocols to contain the expanding failure cascade. If Earth's activation didn't occur within the deadline, advanced species would be forced to implement cosmic quarantine procedures that would isolate the entire galactic sector until the consciousness instability resolved itself naturally, a process that could take millions of years. Your choice, the consciousness emphasized as the chamber filled with distress signals from dying civilizations, determines whether this region of the galaxy becomes a cosmic wasteland or achieves unprecedented levels of consciousness integration. No pressure in galactic history has ever been equivalent to what your species now faces. With civilization-ending stakes and an impossible timeline, Dr. Kimathe found herself preparing to make contact with beings she had never met, asking them to sacrifice their humanity for civilizations they couldn't imagine, using technologies that would transform her own consciousness beyond recognition. But before she could begin the process that would determine the fate of 17 worlds, the consciousness revealed one final truth that would change everything about how they approached humanity's ultimate choice. The consciousness disclosed that the 17 qualified activators had been unconsciously connected to the cosmic network their entire lives, and that they were already aware of the crisis through dreams and visions that had been preparing them for this moment since childhood.